If you have already watched this introductory information, you can skip ahead no more than 15 minutes. Hello, welcome. I am predicting that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of the famous music duo Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall to the ground on August 30th, 2025, and then die as a result of his injuries on September 4th, 2025. This time-stamped email proves that this prediction that Paul Simon will die on August 1st, 2025 has been known since November 9th. We can see here the timestamp November 9th, 2024. On November 8th, 2024, we received the relevant prophetic signs related to Paul Simon. And as I wrote right here, God was pointing to November 8th ahead of time because Simon's death will point to Revelation chapter 8, verse 1. And this is the reason why Paul Simon will die on August 1st, 2025. In short, the date 8:1 and 11:8 hint at Revelation 8:1 in the Bible, which describes a period of silence that was observed in heaven. Paul Simon's first hit was Sound of Silence. As I wrote right here, it is exactly 38 weeks between November 8th and August 1st, 2025, and Paul Simon is predicted to die at the age of 83, for which 38 weeks hints at. All right, the analysis that God was pointing to August 1st was 100% correct. However, Paul Simon did not die on August 1st. Instead, God provided clear and relevant signs related to Paul Simon, which revealed adding 34 days to reach September 4th. The prophetic sign we received on August 1st revealed adding 34 days to reach September 4th. There are countless other reasons for knowing that Paul Simon will die on September 4th, but the prophetic sign that we expected in advance of August 1st revealed adding 34 days to reach September 4th. The sign we received was the news report, the breaking of the news of the sale of the storied mansion in Los Angeles that was built for the most prolific TV producer in history, Aaron Spelling, and God uses extremes and records for his signs, who produced the longest-running drama series in history, Seventh Heaven. Paul Simon's most recent album is 7 Psalms, and his 7th solo album is the album Graceland, which is about a mansion. In his signs, God has been using this theme of mansions to relate to Paul Simon. This isn't the only example. For example, also, the sale of Paul Simon's mansion was a prophetic sign on July 1st, 2022. This sign right here is also the sale of a mansion. And like the sale of Simon's mansion, the price that it sold at was a prophetic sign. This sign here of Aaron Spelling's mansion sold for $110 million. Before I explain that, there is another connection that I forgot to mention between Paul Simon's Graceland Mansion album, his 7th album, and Aaron Spelling, who produced the TV series Seventh Heaven, which is that one of Simon's hit songs that was released from the Graceland album, The Boy in the Bubble, was inspired by Aaron Spelling's TV movie, The Boy in the Plastic Bubble. This mansion sold for $110 million. And this is because Paul Simon is 9/11 symbolism in God's signs. God uses firsts for prophetic signs in general. And Paul Simon opened with a performance in the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live after 9/11. Simon also performed at the 10th anniversary at the 9/11 Memorial. And Simon is known for being from New York City. That's why this mansion in this prophetic sign on August 1st, 2025, sold for $110 million. It sold for $110 million exactly 37 months after the sale of Paul Simon's mansion. 37 hints at 3 sets of 7. The Israelites were led by Joshua into the promised land and then enacted a symbolic 3 sets of 7 before the walls of security of ancient Jericho collapsed in God's judgment. Joshua died in the Bible at the age of 110. On 9/11, the Twin Towers were 110 stories before they collapsed, and then engendered a small earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, where George Washington was inaugurated. And through the 9/11 events, God pointed to George Washington because Washington was inaugurated in Federal Hall and afterwards marched down Wall Street, as in the Israelites march around the walls of security of Jericho, into Trinity Chapel, today nicknamed the Miracle Chapel, because it was the only building that survived the falling debris at Ground Zero and survived without even a broken window, due to the 70-year-old sycamore tree that was uprooted in the process of sheltering the chapel. And today there is a 20-foot-high bronze statue of the roots of this tree to commemorate it for saving the chapel. And the reason why God pointed to this chapel that Washington went into is because inside the chapel, at the beginning, the founding of the nation, as in the foundation of Federal Hall being cracked, Washington consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its divine protection and blessings, which it temporarily did on 9/11, when 2 planes struck the 2 towers 17 minutes apart, and the towers were again 110 stories high. 2 planes 17 minutes apart hints at 2 times 17 equals 34. On 9/11, the Dow Jones Index was closed at 9,605.51. The 9,605 hints at 9 and 6 plus 5 equals 11, and it was closed 0.34 points above the previous day's close. In other words, 34 is a 9/11 number. Paul Simon is symbolism in God's signs for 9/11. On 9/11, 110 stories collapsed, and we have this sale of this mansion that is connected to Paul Simon that sold for $110 million, 34 days before it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and fall down, as in collapse of the towers, and then die as a result of his injuries on September 4th, 2025. It is predicted that on August 30th, Paul Simon will slip and fall, and then his injuries will lead to his death. And August 30th is 29 days after the sale of this mansion for $110 million, which, as I've now explained, hints at the 110 stories that collapsed on 9/11. And 29 is a number that God uses in order to hint at 9/11 through the use of only 2 numbers, 2 and 9, 29, which hints at 1 and 1 and 9, and therefore 9/11. One thing to add here is that Paul Simon is predicted to die as a result of falling, as a result of injuries incurred from slipping and falling. It is irrelevant the state of Paul Simon's health currently. That said, there is 0 news in the media regarding the state of Paul Simon's health. But like I said, it's irrelevant anyway, because Paul Simon is predicted to slip and fall and then die. Now, the reason for going into all of this is because it needs to be explained that in reality, or rather essentially, I predicted that Paul Simon would die on September 4th, back in November of 2024. Because again, as I explained here in this email that was written on November 9th, 2024, God was pointing to August 1st, 2025 for Paul Simon's death because of Revelation 8:1, as I explained. And I just now explained the trail of signs that led from August 1st to September 4th. And those signs were revealed through knowing August 1st ahead of time. Therefore, essentially, if you are reasonable and you have the eyes to see, I predicted that Paul Simon would die on September 4th, back in November of 2024. The reasonable person will recognize that this is true. I am predicting that on September 25th, 2025, a dirty bomb, a conventional bomb with nuclear material, will explode in New York City in Penn Station. And also a dirty bomb will explode in the port of Los Angeles. In his signs, God is clearly communicating that this event will happen. It's just a question of whether or not this will occur on September 25th. I am predicting that Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom will die in a plane crash in St. Louis as they are traveling from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles in Busch Stadium in St. Louis on August 2nd, 2028. This will be during the predicted presidential campaign of Gavin Newsom. As a result of Gavin Newsom's death, Michelle Obama will become the Democrat Party's presidential nomination. Michelle Obama will, quote unquote, win the election over J.D. Vance on November 7th, 2028, and will become the president on January 20th, 2029. Donald Trump is predicted to run as J.D. Vance's vice president. This scheme to overcome the 22nd Amendment will backfire and inspire Michelle Obama and Barack Obama to run on the ticket with Barack Obama as Michelle Obama's vice president. She will then step down and Barack Obama will become the president again. It is predicted that there will be a massive Mary apparition on the beach in Rio, Brazil on April 24th, 2029. It is now recognized that there will be 2 massive Mary apparitions on the beach in Rio. The first of the 2 is predicted to be on March 22nd, 2029. These predicted Mary apparitions will not be secretive. They will be mainstream, worldwide news. Like all Mary apparitions in history, including at Lourdes, Guadalupe, and Fatima, this Mary apparition will be a demon pretending to be Mary. It is predicted that on April 26th, 2029, the key will open the bottomless pit and fallen angels will cross over into the earthly realm. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to the 5th trumpet judgment that is described in Revelation chapter 9, when the demonic realm collides with the earthly realm. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to demons pretending to be aliens. The demons pretending to be aliens will claim to be here to help us with our nuclear weapons. It is predicted that Pope Francis will be resurrected from the grave on April 26th, 2029, and it is possible that on this day, Pope Francis will announce that aliens have arrived and have made him the ambassador for the world. This will immediately give Pope Francis, the Antichrist, supreme power over governments of the world. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to a zombie pandemic and the masses becoming demonically possessed that will be facilitated through the thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist and 5G frequencies. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to the coming genocide politicide in America. The resurrection rapture event will occur on Pentecost on May 27th, 2029. On September 11th, 2029, there will be a catastrophic asteroid hit of Earth in the Indian Ocean. The greatest seismic effect of this will be felt on the other side of the globe, which is North America, and this will trigger an eruption of Yellowstone volcano and will cause the volcano in the Canary Islands to collapse into the Atlantic Ocean and send a mega tsunami towards the East Coast. It will also trigger the collapse of the Hoover Dam, which will cause a water panic in California, and many other devastating earthquakes. The day of the Lord the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ, Judgment Day, will be at the end of 2031. The date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. All right, welcome. This video is predicting that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will die on September 4th, 2025. This video, however, was produced prior to it being learned the way in which Paul Simon will die. It is now recognized through God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, that Paul Simon will first slip and fall on August 30th, and then, as a result of his injuries, will die on September 4th. Paul Simon has a big hit, a hit song, Slip Slidin Away. And this is one way in which God, or through this song and many other prophetic signs, God is communicating that Paul Simon will slip and fall on August 30th. Currently, there is no news of Paul Simon's health. Absolutely no news of Paul Simon's health is in the media. Furthermore, he recently finished a concert tour on August 6th. So as of August 6th, he was healthy enough to perform at concerts. But given now that we know he will die from falling, his health, his state of health, would be irrelevant anyway. So it'd be one thing to predict the death of an old man. He is 83. That said, he could live another 7 years. There is no way to know from the media that he will die on September 4th because there's no news of his personal health. But more than that, he is predicted to die from falling and suffering from the injuries. And that cannot be known ahead of time. There's no prior warning or heads up, such as a person's health or state of health. Again, just to be clear, Paul Simon is predicted to die on September 4th. Yes, and he is old, yes, but he is predicted to die from falling. And that date is known also to be August 30th, which is after today's date. The post date of the video you are watching on the social media platform proves that this video was posted prior to August 30th. And of course, there's no humanly way possible that I could know that Paul Simon will slip and fall on August 30th and then die on September 4th. In other words, when this prediction comes to pass, it'll prove everything that I say in this video, and that's the purpose of this prediction that is from God. And it is also, of course, to prove that the righteous Christian God of the Bible is the true God. All right, now, this particular video that you are watching was produced prior to August 19th, 2025. God overwhelmingly pointed to the date August 19th regarding Paul Simon, and because of that, it was assumed that this would be the day that he would fall and that he would die 12 days later on August 31st. What happened is that August 19th ended up being another step in the trail of signs, and this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works in principle on trails of signs. The full intended meaning of any of God's prophetic signs cannot be properly or fully understood without their context and connections to the other prophetic signs, something that other sign watchers don't fully appreciate. And it is through these interconnected signs that God is able to tell stories, and it is through these stories and themes that God is able to communicate extremely important and essential knowledge that everyone needs to know, which is why all of the videos must be watched. And so what happened on August 19th was we received another clear, relevant Paul Simon sign, which would have been expected Had it not been the day he would fall, we would expect that he would fall or another clear, relevant sign. Now, the sign we received on this day overlapped another thing that God is communicating, which is the prediction for the explosion of dirty bombs in New York City and Los Angeles. Now, what happened was on this day, Walmart recalled a lot of their shrimp from the Great Value line of shrimp, frozen shrimp. It's a long story. I explained it in another video, but long story short, it's one of these many boat ship signs that God has been communicating in relation to Paul Simon during this month of August, as explained in other videos. And so the shrimp come from a shrimp boat from Indonesia, and that's prophetic for a reason, which is explained in the other videos, in particular, this particular sign. But this all points back to the movie Forrest Gump. A big part of the plot is a shrimp boat, a shrimping boat. And the reason for Forrest Gump is that Forrest Gump is known for its soundtrack, as is Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel known for a soundtrack to a movie, Mrs. Robinson. The song Mrs. Robinson appears on the Forrest Gump soundtrack. In fact, one of the iconic scenes in the movie of Forrest Gump running across the country, across America, is it appears when this song is played, Mrs. Robinson. Simon and Garfunkel are also known for a song named America, which is also about traveling across America. The name Paul Simon hints at the names of the two chief fishers of men in the New Testament, Paul and Simon Peter. Paul Simon was married to Carrie Fisher. The names Peter and Paul each occur 153 times in the Bible. In John chapter 21, Peter hauled into the boat 153 fish. The shrimp that Walmart recalled were hauled or fished into boats. A central part of the plot of the movie Forrest Gump involves a shrimping boat in the Gulf Coast, on the Gulf Coast. In Paul Simon's Graceland song, he describes traveling from the Gulf Coast to the King of Rock and Roll's mansion in the 4x4th state. In the movie Forrest Gump, there is an iconic scene involving Elvis Presley, the King of Rock and Roll. This is why it is predicted that 4x4 days after this shrimp boat sign on August 19th, it is predicted that Paul Simon will die on September 4th, which is written outside of the US as 4/9, and 4 divided by 9 equals 0.44. And again, the number 4 is associated with Paul Simon and God's signs, which is why Paul Simon drove to the mansion in Memphis, as explained in the song Graceland, which is in the 4x4th state, which is how all this connects to this movie Forrest Gump, which connects to Paul Simon through the fishing and his name, but also through the fishing and the boat, Paul Simon's name, but also the Simon and Garfunkel song in the movie Forrest Gump, which is part of their soundtrack, Mrs. Robinson. The movie Forrest Gump was released in 1994, as in 94, which further confirms that Paul Simon will die on the date 9/4. And so that's how this particular prophetic sign. Oh, and the shrimp is being recalled due to radioactive contaminants in the shrimp, which hints at the coming evacuations due to the radioactive contamination in New York City and the Port of Los Angeles. Now, as you watch the rest of this video, keep in mind that, again, this video was made prior to August 19th. We received the prophetic sign that confirmed all of the analysis, and so therefore all of the analysis is 100% correct. It just wasn't the day that Paul Simon was going to fall. It was a date for another prophetic Paul Simon related sign, which I just touched upon, I didn't really explain. So, for example, when I talk about in the rest of this video, the date 8/19 and the day Paul Simon will fall, keep in mind that it's just part of the trail of signs, and it was completely relevant, the analysis that you'll be hearing. And so therefore you need to learn this analysis because God provided this analysis for you so that you could pick up on what God is communicating through his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which, like I said, tells these stories that you need to know. Hello, welcome. This video is predicting that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of the famous duo Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall on August 19th, 2025. He will then die. It is predicted that he will then die on August 30th, 2025. And it is predicted that the first news of his death will be on the 31st, the day after. Okay, so this is what is predicted here. God has been using Paul Simon in his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. He has been using Paul Simon for many years. This is what it is believed to be how this will unfold. What I mean is God has also been using Paul Simon not only for prophetic signs, but ultimately for the timing of his death. The timing of his death in the 8th month, the month of August, for example, will point to the book of Revelation, chapter 8. The first verse of this chapter 8 describes a period of silence in heaven. And Paul Simon's first big hit that launched his career is Sound of Silence. This sound of silence that was heard, or rather observed in heaven in the beginning of Revelation chapter 8 is a warning which is followed by the 7 trumpets of judgment from God, which is incidentally for the reason for a number of things, including Paul Simon's best-selling album, his 7th solo album, Graceland, and also his recent newest album, 7 Psalms. He is also known for his big hit, Late in the Evening, a name which in itself hints at time is running out for judgment and destruction from God, a warning. And this song is known for its heavy use of trumpets. So again, he also has a big hit, Slip Slidin Away, which incidentally was released in 1977. And that's part of the reason for how it is believed that Paul Simon will first slip and fall on August 19th and then die on August 30th or 31st, or basically both if he dies on the 30th and the news of the death is not reported until the 31st. All right, now having said this, like I've said, the knowledge that God is using Paul Simon and the timing of his death has been known for years. Regarding the specific date, though, that is predicted here, the post date of the video that you are watching this on the social media platform that you are watching it on proves this prediction is being made ahead of time. You are watching this prior to August 19th. Furthermore, this time-stamped email proves that this prediction was made at least on August 15th, prior to August 19th. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I'll forward this to you. Now that said, there will be, of course, the skeptic that will say, well, I must have made a video or had reasons for every day of the year hoping that finally I would get it right and that Paul Simon would finally die on the date. That is not even absurd. That is crazy. And only a crazy person would do that. And so to think that someone would do that makes that person the crazy person, the completely irrational person. Paul Simon, for that matter, could live another 7 years. He's only 83, if you will. And there is zero news of his health in the news right now. Furthermore, he just finished a tour. He was just On August 6th, he finished his recent tour that began in April. So he was healthy enough to perform at concerts, in other words. There was 1 day or two that he missed during the tour due to his bad back. But I'm not aware of anyone dying due to a bad back. Okay, so in other words, there is zero news of Paul Simon's health. There is no reason to believe that this date is going to be the date he will die, because he could live for years. And why would someone make up videos and reasons for how that date is known for every day? That's crazy. Okay, so just think about it, right? Just be a little bit more reasonable if that is you, if what I'm describing is you. And there is a good chance that it does describe you, because the truth is, humans aren't rational by nature. And that includes the conclusion by many people that there is no God or there is no evidence for God. The belief that there is no evidence for God is the core belief of the religion of agnostic atheism, because every worldview is a religion, and so is that religion or worldview. And the core belief, and every religion has a core belief, and the core belief of that particular religion is that there is no evidence for God, which is a lie. There is an overwhelming amount of evidence, not only prophecy, scientific evidence even, etc. However, that's another subject. The truth is that there are people that choose the irrational conclusion that there is no God and there's no evidence for God based on their desire that there not be a God, that they are accountable for their sin, that is. In other words, the righteous Christian God of the Bible is offensive to most people for a reason. Jesus said, for example, "Blessed is he who is not offended by me." And many, many people are offended by Christ, and Christianity is by far the most offensive religion on earth. That's why people hate it in the West, for example. And so, anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that let's think about this more reasonably. I'm definitely documenting this prediction as being made ahead of time. Now, what I'm about to do is read the profound reasons for how I know about August 19th and August 30th and 31st. And as you will see, these reasons could not be concocted in the imagination of a human being. No one is creative enough to come up with these reasons, let alone for multiple dates. In other words, you will clearly see that the reasons that I will be providing here are from God. But, of course, the prediction when it comes to pass will also prove this. And on that note, when the prediction comes to pass, it'll prove the things that I am saying. It'll prove the reasons and the things contained in the reasons. And that is the purpose for the prediction. The purpose of this prediction that is from God, and I know far better than anyone the reason and purpose for this prediction, is to prove the controversial things that I'll be saying in these videos. And when the prediction comes to pass, the wise person will recognize that they need to watch every minute of every video on this channel. Okay, now let's just get into it. This email is documenting the prediction that singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon & Garfunkel will slip and fall on August 19th, 2025, and then die on August 30th. The news of his death will is predicted to first be reported on August 31st. Paul Simon has a big hit, Slip Slidin Away. Simon is predicted to slip and fall on August 19th, and then die on August 30th, or 31st, or the news of his death being reported on the 31st as a result of the fall. God is using Paul Simon and the agent who first signed him, Wally Amos of Famous Amos Cookies, who founded the Famous Amos Cookies company, to point to the Hebrew idiom that is repeated in Amos chapter 1, which has 15 verses. Let's just pause here and talk about Wally Amos. He founded Famous Amos Cookies, and he was the agent that first signed Simon & Garfunkel through luring them into his office with cookies. Wally Amos died at the age of 88 on the prophetic Hebrew calendar date, which is another story explained in other videos. And that served to point to the book of Amos, chapter 8, which begins with a description of a basket of summer fruit, which points to the month of August, in which baskets of summer fruit appear. And again, Paul Simon will die in the month of August because of the first verse in Revelation chapter 8, which regards the sound of silence in heaven. Okay, but also God is pointing to the first chapter of the book of Amos through Wally Amos and through Paul Simon. And that chapter again has chapter 1 has 15 verses. And that's why Paul Simon had his prophetic dream, in which a voice instructed him to produce his recent 7 Psalms album on the date 1/15, January 15th in 2019, which hints at Amos 1 with its 15 verses. The Hebrew idiom that is repeated in the 15 verses of Amos is, quote, "for 3 transgressions and for 4, which means the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded, and now judgment and destruction are unavoidable." Simon and Garfunkel's first album, after famous Amos signed them, was Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. Wednesday is the 4th day of the week, which gives us the 3 and the 4 here. This hints at the Hebrew idiom for 3 transgressions and for 4. The prophetic dream on the date 1/15 is exactly 344 weeks before Simon is predicted to slip and fall on August 19th. So this 344 weeks hints at this Hebrew idiom that God is using Paul Simon for 3 transgressions and for 4. Lord willing, when Paul Simon dies, he will be homeward bound. Simon's song Homeward Bound was released on January 19th, 1966, exactly 715 months before Simon's predicted fall. 715 is the 587th composite number. A composite number are numbers that aren't prime numbers. In God's signs, Paul Simon is symbolic of 9/11 in 2001. For example, he performed at the first Saturday Night Live broadcast in Manhattan after 9/11. He also performed at the 10th anniversary at the 9/11 Memorial. Simon is also from New York City. Just 2 months after 9/11, in 2001, Flight 587 crashed into Queens, New York City, where Paul Simon is from. Let me just pause here and give you another second witness to this prophetic sign. This is a big sign, and it's relevant in other ways in God's big picture of signs. It's only just now discovered that it relates to Paul Simon because he's from Queens. It also, for example, relates to Trump, who's also from Queens. But anyway, on the day that Flight 587 crashed, the Pick 3 Lotto in New Jersey, which was the location from where the towers were seen to be struck across the Hudson River. In other words, it's part of the 9/11 sign. Anyway, on that day, that was the first, and God uses firsts for signs. It was the first day ever that the New Jersey Lotto had 2 Pick 3 Lottos in the same day. The first Pick 3 Lotto numbers were 587, and then later in the day, the Pick 3 Lotto numbers were 578. And that was the day of the crash of Flight 587. That was 2 Lotto numbers. This was 2 months after 9/11. Okay. Now, and if you recall, because of that, people at first believed it was probably another terrorist attack. How could that happen just 2 months after 9/11? That happened because it's from God, a prophetic sign, another warning. Incidentally, I'll elaborate more on that. The date of the crash is the sign. It crashed on the date 11/12, so just 1 day more than 2 months after 9/11. But the date 1112 is in itself a 9/11 sign because it hints at the 11th hour transitioning into the 12th hour. That's why on 9/11, Flight 11, with a crew of 11 people, crashed into the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union, and New York City has 11 letters. The reason for all of this is because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness. In other words, the transition into the darkness, the 12th hour, which is again the reason for the date 1112. In English, the 11th hour is an idiom that means last chance. Time is running out. As in other words, the events of 9/11 were a warning of last chance. Time is running out. That period of last chance will have been concluded, if you will, with the death of Paul Simon. Do you understand how profound and important the death of Paul Simon is? Paul Simon, again, is the warning that parallels the warning in Revelation chapter 8, the sound of silence in heaven, which is followed by the 7 trumpet judgments. And America is described in those 7 trumpet judgments, as I explain in other videos. The mistaken belief that America isn't in Bible prophecy is incorrect. Do you see? Paul Simon, who symbolizes 9/11 because he's from New York City and sang at the first broadcast in Manhattan on Saturday Night Live after 9/11 and at the 10th anniversary at the memorial, is 9/11 symbolism. And that's why his death with this 587 number, because it connects to Queens and 9/11, is the bookend, if you will. Oh my, I just realized. Paul Simon, I have to look this up. There's something about bookends with Simon and Garfunkel. Hold on. All right, this is really crazy. I mean, this does happen. This happens all the time, actually. As I'm reading in the information that I wrote, something new comes to me. But this has to be the most profound thing of all, because it's finally understood. I mean, the big thing about Paul Simon is what I just said. I mean, I was just really just going with it, right? That's the Holy Spirit there. I was really just going with it. This was all new to me as I was speaking it into the microphone. He really is the bookend. I mean, literally. The 4th album of Simon and Garfunkel, and God uses the number 4, furthermore, in association with Paul Simon and his signs. The 4th album is the album Bookends. You know, I'm a little young for Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel albums, right? So I don't remember these things. This is all, from research that I would know something like this. But I just recalled reading about bookends at one point in the past here, after learning about Paul Simon being prophetic. Anyway, this is the 4th album. And when I paused the video recording here, it was at 5 minutes and 5 seconds into this particular microphone recording. And the 5th song released from this album is America. Anyway, there's more to the number 5 in Paul Simon too. His last album with Simon and Garfunkel, Bridge Over Troubled Water, was the 5th album. That was their biggest album. The name Paul Simon is equal to 500 in Hebrew gematria. The name Paul is equal to 50 in simple English gematria. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. His only solo number 1 hit was 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. And I'm sure I'm missing some 5s here, but it's all about the 5s too. And that's because of the 5th trumpet, which is what God is also using Paul Simon for, which is explained in other videos. But anyway, one of the reasons for Paul Simon is that he symbolizes America. He is the GOAT, if you will, greatest of all time of popular songwriting, music songwriting. He's considered to be one of the GOATs, or if not the GOAT. And he does symbolize America. For one thing, he has this hit, America, and also a hit American Tune, which incidentally he sang at the inaugural ball for a president, Jimmy Carter. So anyway, the point is that Paul Simon symbolizes America, and so the song America is on this album Bookends. For some reason, though, it says the song book America wasn't released until many years later, which is strange. I guess they went back and released it later, realizing that it would be a hit. Oh, well, anyway, there may even be a prophetic reason to that I'm not aware of. Incidentally, the first song released from the album peaked at number 13 on the charts. And 13 symbolizes America, which was founded on 13 colonies. Okay, so anyway, let me just add this before moving on here. Some people always ask me, why are you always so focused on prophetic signs regarding America? The answer to that is because God is. America is God's Gentile nation. There are only two nations in the history of the world that were founded on a relationship with God and the Bible, Israel and America. And I had met a South African once tell me, well, no, the people that originally founded South Africa also, but no, that doesn't apply because they came from the Netherlands. And the Pilgrims were escaping religious persecution and from the King of England. That's why and they saw their crossing of the Atlantic as analogous to the Israelites' escape from the King of Egypt and the persecution, and then crossing the Jordan River into the Promised Land. The New World was the Promised Land for the Pilgrims. Okay, America was God's nation of Christian disciples that he used to spread the gospel around the world in the 19th and 20th centuries. And Jesus said that he wouldn't return until the gospel had gone around the world, and now it has, because of America and the other English-speaking countries. So anyway, so God is, and judgment is commensurate with the amount of blessings and light the nation or individual has received. America was profoundly blessed, but it has turned away from God, and now it needs to be destroyed before the second coming of Christ. It's all part of the plan here, and God will regather and has regathered Israel in order to establish it as his nation through the 1,000 years of peace in the Messianic age when Jesus Christ will rule from the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And so that's where we are at. We are in the final years here with the end times and the persecution of true Christians, including by other quote-unquote Christians, in this final period led by the Antichrist. And in order to test the faith of these quote-unquote Christians and separate the chaff from the wheat, or the tares from the wheat, and the goats from the sheep, etc. And then the second coming, okay? But it's all about America. It's all about his church. The purpose of the end times is his church, and America is his church. Okay? If you will. So that's why Paul Simon, the most famous American singer, songwriter, if you will, and by the way, he also represents the baby boomer generation, and it is also all about the baby boomer generation. Make no mistake, the second coming cannot possibly occur after the baby boomer generation passes away from the scene. There is absolutely no way that's going to happen, and they are beginning to pass away from the scene, and that's why the second coming is soon. It is also because of the baby boomer generation being where they at this stage of their life. Okay, it's a long story. That's another thing about Paul Simon, though. It's about the baby boomer generation. Okay, so I think we've covered enough here about the bookends. This is the most profound thing. Paul Simon is a bookend. Like I was saying, his death will be the bookend to the warning of judgment. That was the 9/11 events. In other words, because of the idiom that I just explained, for 3 transgressions and for 4, which means the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded and now judgment is unavoidable, that will be communicated with the death of Paul Simon. There will be no more chance for America to repent and turn back to God. Sorry to those who are still expecting a revival, like the followers of Jonathan Cahn and Eric Metaxas, 2 people whom I love and have a lot of respect for. But that's what this sign will communicate. For 3 transgressions and for 4, there is no more time to repent. It's on. Paul Simon is the bookend. The period of grace and opportunity to repent will will be communicated to be finished with the death of Paul Simon. And like I said earlier, I know far better than anyone the reason and purpose for this prediction that is from God. And the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction. It is to prove what I have said. Judgment is now unavoidable. Paul Simon's best-selling album, his best-selling solo album, is Graceland, which is named after Elvis Presley's mansion. On January 3rd, 2024, a section of the roof of the mansion of Miami Dolphins Tyreek Hill caught on fire. First of all, this date was expected to be a Paul Simon date ahead of time. It's uncanny. There have been so many Paul Simon dates that I have recognized ahead of time. And to be fair, because of the recognition of this date, it was believed that Paul Simon would die on this date. But this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the interconnection of other prophetic signs. In other words, the full intended meaning of any of God's prophetic signs cannot be properly or fully understood without their context and connection with the other connections with the other prophetic signs, which is something that is not appreciated by the others who are watching for God's signs. God, through the connections, is able to communicate knowledge through telling these stories, including, for example, this theme of Paul Simon. This isn't possible with just singular, isolated prophetic signs. By the way, this is how the Bible works as well. The Bible isn't a linear document, and it is not meant for isolating passages like Calvinists and Reformed theologians do. The Bible is meant to be understood as a whole, including the New Testament. But one can take an infinite number of pathways through the Bible and likewise through God's big picture of signs. Anyway, this date was known ahead of time because it was the 50th prime number of days after the release of the Seven Psalms album. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the number 5 and 50 and 500 relates to Paul Simon. Again, his name, Paul Simon, equals 500 in Hebrew gematria. Paul equals 50 in simple English gematria, and on and on like I explained a minute ago. But I also forgot a minute ago to mention that the Graceland mansion sits on the 5th prime number of acres and is connected to Chicago and New Orleans, the home of the Antichrist, Chicago, with the I-55. Anyway, that's because, by the way, it's in Little Egypt, which is symbolic of a king, as in the king's palace in Egypt, but also Memphis, Egypt is why the name Memphis, Tennessee, where the king of rock and roll's mansion is. So in other words, all this points to the king's symbolism and persecution, but also the most evil, wicked king in Israel's history ruled for 55 years. That's why the I-55 connects to Little Egypt and the king's mansion in Memphis, Tennessee. All right, so what happened on this 113? And by the way, this was also confirmed or recognized ahead of time that it would be prophetic, because not only was it the 50th prime number of days after the release of Seven Psalms, his recent album, but also the date 1-3 hints at 13. And as I mentioned earlier, the number 13 symbolizes America, and so does Paul Simon. Because of this number 13, it is truly profound that we had this prophetic sign that was expected in advance. Not only did we have a Paul Simon sign because of the mansion catching on fire, and this theme of mansion occurs in God's signs related to Paul Simon, but it was the Miami Dolphins. And it has been known for years that the number 13 is associated with the Miami Dolphins in God's prophetic signs. And why is this? And I mean years. I mean like 5-6 years. This has been known. And the reason why I know this, incidentally, is the Lord had his hand on my life for this purpose, this video right here that I'm making, for example. And that's why I grew up a Miami Dolphins fan. And I remember the first time I ever recorded something on a beta video machine, if you recall those things, was the Monday Night Football game when they played the Bears. That year, in 85, and incidentally, 8 plus 5 equals 13, the Bears were undefeated, and they were looking at going and having an undefeated season. The only other team to have an undefeated season in history was the Miami Dolphins. And so guess what happened? The Miami Dolphins ended up being the only team to beat the Bears that year, and that was 13 years after their undefeated season. In their undefeated season, they won the Super Bowl, and it was player number 13 that won the MVP award. 13 years later was the 85 Bears, 8 plus 5 equals 13. They lost one game to the Miami Dolphins in week number 13. And the reason why they lost is because the reason why the Bears were so dominant that year was because of their revolutionary style of defense, which was countered by the revolutionary style of offense by the quarterback of the Dolphins, the quick passing play quarterback, player number 13. And so the Miami Dolphins in prophetic history are all about the number 13, as you can see, and that's why it was astounding to receive this Miami Dolphins mansion sign on this date 1-3, which hints at 13. Now, the Dolphins' 72 season, I just said what I wrote. Let me just read it again, whatever. The date 1-3 hints at number 13. The Miami Dolphins won the Super Bowl in 72, and the MVP of the game was number 13. The Dolphins' 72 season was the only undefeated season in NFL history. 13 years later, in 85, 8 plus 5 equals 13. The Bears, by the way, only lost one game in their season, and the loss came in week 13 to Miami. The Bears lost because of quarterback for Miami, number 13. The Antichrist president, and by the way, in Bible prophecy, or in the Bible, the number 13 symbolizes the Antichrist. That's because, for example, Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist, was the 13th generation from Adam. Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews on the 2 13th days of the month. And also the two Antichrists are described in the book of Revelation, chapter 13. Well, anyway, the Antichrist president, who is from Chicago, as in the Chicago Bears, hosted both the 85 Chicago Bears and the 72 Dolphins at the White House. The reason why he hosted both of them is because he was a Chicago Bears fan, and he wanted to host the Bears because at that time in 85, teams didn't visit the White House after they won. It wasn't a tradition. And so he hosted the 85 Bears, and in the ceremony, he mentioned that they were the best team in history, which the 72 Dolphins took exception to. And so being the, out of politeness, and also because he enjoys the spotlight, Barack Obama also then hosted the 72 Bears at the White House, the only undefeated team in history. Okay, now this is because Obama is a big fan of the 85 Bears. And that's, by the way, because it's prophetic, because that was the year that Obama moved to Chicago. And God is using Chicago for signs to point to Barack Obama. Okay, now, exactly 85 weeks after this Miami Dolphins sign, which again points to the 85 Bears, on the date 1-3, is the date it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and fall on August 19th. So we had this Paul Simon sign because it was the mansion, and it pointed to the 85 Bears, and that's why this exact 85 weeks. It's amazing beyond words. To the predicted death, or rather slip and fall of Paul Simon. Wow. Okay. One other thing to mention here, the reason prophetically for the name Tyreek Hill is that America, speaking of Paul Simon, who symbolizes America, in Bible prophecy in the Old Testament, the nation or people of Tyre, if you will, symbolize America. Their strength, the ancient city of Tyre, was prosperous and a superpower in its day because of its natural security being surrounded by the ocean. It was an island off the shore of the Eastern Mediterranean, and they were finally conquered when Alexander the Great built a bridge over to the island. But prior to that, the reason for the success of Tyre was the city being surrounded by ocean, which is the case with America. So Tyre symbolizes America. Hill symbolizes Obama, a high place, because the name Bama in Hebrew means high place. And the false religious worship the Jews would conduct on the tops of mountains was referred to with the euphemism, the high places. Anyway, so that's why Tyreek Hill, okay? But there's something also interesting here is that Tyreek Hill wears number 10. And this sign occurred on the date 1-3, which hints at 13. And Paul Simon was born on the date 10-13. And by the way, he was born in 41, and 41 is the 13th prime number. So that's another way which confirms that this is also about Paul Simon, because the number 10 player had his mansion burned on the date 1-3. But the mansion burned on the roof, which is more confirmation for the symbolism in the hill, the high places, which points to Obama from Chicago, who loves the Chicago 85 Bears. Okay? All right, a couple more things to mention here regarding this prophecy involving the Miami Dolphins. I just mentioned how the Miami Dolphins, the 72 Dolphins, and the 85 Bears visited Obama at the White House. This is very significant. It's part of this prophecy, or rather, this prophecy identifies the Antichrist. Again, the number 13 in the Bible symbolizes the Antichrist. 85 hints at 8 plus 5 equals 13. Obama moved to Chicago in 85. That's why this is so very important. The 85 Bears, oh, by the way, also, they were known for their revolutionary style of defense that dominated the league. They were known for really shutting out the other teams, except when it came to the Miami Dolphins, like I explained. They had a name. There was a term, or rather a name for this defense. It was called the 46 defense. 46 is the 4 times 4th semi-prime number, a number that is only divisible by 2 other prime numbers, and 4 times 4 hints at 44, the 44th president, who is from Chicago and moved to Chicago in 85, which is why he became a 85 Chicago Bears fan. He moved to Chicago when the May 19th Communist Organization disbanded, because he was a member of the May 19th Communist Organization, which was responsible for bombing the Capitol building in 1983. In November of 1983, the Capitol building was bombed, and I'll prove to you that it was during the time that Obama was a member of this organization. It occurred 9 days. It was 15 days, which is the equivalent of 21,600 minutes. 21,600 minutes hints at 216, which is 6 times 6 times 6. Barack Obama was in the clock on the recording here hit 216 right as I said that. Obama was born on the 216th day of the calendar year. The name Barack is equal to 216 in English gematria. Okay, and the Capitol building bombing, which was 15 days after this other bombing that I'm about to explain, was 21,600 minutes. So that hints at Barack. Now, the other bombing was on October 23rd, 1983, which was the infamous Beirut barrack bombings, as in Barack bombings. And the name Obama in itself hints at Obama. So we have this profound connection from the Barack as in barrack bombings, or Barack as in Barack bombings, with the number 216, which identifies Barack Obama, to the May 19th Communist Organization bombing of the Capitol building, which is all symbolism for who Obama really is, a communist, which is why he got into politics in the first place, with the help of Bill Ayers, the founder of the Weather Underground. And the May 19th Communist Organization was an offshoot of that. But when that disbanded in 1985, Barack Obama decided to move to Chicago. Why? Because that's where his biological father was from, who was a communist who moved from Chicago to lead the communist movement in Hawaii. Barack Obama's grandfather was a CIA agent. And that's not a conspiracy. That's a fact. He was moving around all over the place, supposedly as a furniture salesman. No, he was a CIA agent, and he was assigned to Hawaii to monitor the communist movement there, which is how the paths of Frank Marshall Davis and Barack Obama's mother crossed. Frank Marshall Davis seduced Barack Obama's mother during all that, and then not wanting to get fired from his job, Obama's grandfather arranged for a student from Kenya that was in Hawaii on a CIA program to fight communism in Kenya to become the supposed father. And that's explaining also why the Obama senior was never around. He agreed to the deal in order to be able to stay in America to get his doctorate. Okay, that's a long story short. But anyway, that's the truth. And so that's why Obama moved to Chicago in '85, the disbandment of the May 19th Communist Organization. And he got into that through Bill Ayers, whom he met when he was at Columbia in New York City. Okay, and also, very significantly, another thing to prove all of this is that the '85 Bears, their win of the Super Bowl in 1986, began a prophetic 30-year cycle in which all of the major sports teams in Chicago won their championships. And they broke serious droughts and ended supposed curses, as in, for example, the curse of the billy goat, as in the goat Antichrist, Barack Obama, with the Chicago Cubs. And the Chicago Blackhawks, I believe, ended the longest, and God uses records, longest drought for the Stanley Cup win, and that was during the time that Obama was at the White House, and that was prophetic visits involving the Chicago Blackhawks as well. Anyway, the 30-year cycle, and in the Bible, 30 years, a 30-year period symbolizes a king. David became a king at the age of 30, as did Joseph. And so at the end of this, and this is hinting at the Antichrist king, at the end of this 30-year period, the Chicago Cubs finally won the World Series. And then 4 days before the 44th president left office, the star player for the Cubs, player number 44, gave Obama jersey number 44. Paul Simon is predicted to die on the date 8/30, August 30th, which hints at 8/3, at the age of 83. 8/30 will be 2,419 days after Simon's prophetic dream, in which a voice instructed him to produce his recent 7 Psalms album. The theme of the album is of crossing over into the afterlife. This connection of 2,419 days hints at the sum of the divisors of 2,419, which is 2,520, which is an extremely important number in Bible prophecy that symbolizes the period of the end of the age before Christ's return. Okay, so Paul Simon is predicted to die at the age of 83 on the day 8/30, and we have this connection to his 7 Psalms album, which is about crossing over into the afterlife. But what confirms this is this 2,520 number. And again, as I mentioned, Paul Simon's death will be the bookend to the warning of judgment that was 9/11, and therefore the beginning of the end, the judgment and destruction, described in the book of Revelation, including Revelation chapter 8, which follows the sound of silence in heaven. This email is documenting, or rather, Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more. Don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit, but importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more. Don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.